Well, Emily signals that we have some time for a few questions. Yes, please.
I have one question for. Thank you. I have one question for Mr. Iyer-Mitra and one for Mr. Zanger. First, about Pakistan. You said you talked about the current situation, and you talked about a triangle between Pakistan, India, and China. Maybe it's not a triangle, but a square, that the US is also a very important factor in the nuclear deterrence in South Asia, and mainly from the Pakistani perspective. Since the end of the 1980s, when Pakistan perceived that the US abandoned her, and more importantly, after the strategic alliance between India and the US, maybe the Pakistanis now perceive the US as part of some kind of threat against Pakistan, that it collaborates with India, or, also in the nuclear dimension. So have you any thoughts about how Pakistan prepare for this kind of eventuality in the nuclear sphere? And as for Mr. Zanger, do you have any kind of comments about the lessons that North Korea have from the Syria affair, from what happened, that they tried to assist Syria with its nuclear program, and the conclusion of that episode? Thank you.
Yes, please.
So it's actually one triangle that leads on to another triangle, because the India-China-Pakistan triangle, with China as one end, feeds into the China-USA-Russia triangle, which is another godforsaken, complicated calculus in its own right. But with Pakistan wanting to expand its nuclear arsenal, it's driven by multiple reasons, some of which are India-related, some of which are America-related. That said, these threats are perceived, because as far as Pakistan, US abandonment of Pakistan goes, I would argue that America did not abandon Pakistan. Pakistan chose very deliberately in the Afghan jihad against the Soviets to choose religious nut jobs over the more secular elements, and there were lots of secular elements willing to fight the Soviets. They chose these religious nut jobs because they wanted to ameliorate an ethnic situation in their northwest frontier province. There are more Pashtuns living in Pakistan than there are in Afghanistan. Once you say religion trumps ethnicity, they lost Bangladesh because of this, because of ethno-linguistic reasons. This was a very determined political gambit on their part to have religious loonies do the fighting. And America had a demobilization plan. I can show you several of these letters. Hussein Haqqani has compiled a whole set of these letters where the Americans sent request after request to the Pakistanis saying, hey, let's come up with a demobilization plan for these guys. Let's think about it. Pakistani said no. They wanted to divert these assets to fight us in Kashmir. So abandonment, I'm afraid, it feeds into their victimhood narrative. Fair enough. But is it realistic? Can it be supported by facts? No. As for a square, yes, unfortunately the America threat does kind of come in at the back, especially the weapon seizure plans and the fact that it's going to supposedly ally with India. I don't know how realistic that is, but yes, the US does play in as a threat, increasingly, much more so than India.
Thank you.
On your Syria question, the main lesson from Syria for the United States was that this may have been actually as big or bigger an intelligence failure as the one that helped propel us into the war with Iraq. I mean, imagine this. This reactor was being built within 100 kilometers of the Iraqi border, one of the most examined spots on Earth. And yet it was not until the head of the Mossad, Amos's colleague, came into Steve Hadley's office one day and dropped a file of photographs on his desk there, and showed him pictures of the North Koreans in Syria, showed him pictures of a reactor whose windows measured exactly the same distance as the windows at Yongbyon. That it became evident to the United States what the North Koreans had done. And I was thinking of this the other day when in this press conference that he had for us the first day back from his surgery, Secretary Kerry told us that we had perfect knowledge. That was his exact words. Absolute knowledge of what was going on in Iran. And considering that we're all still trying to figure out exactly what the nature of the trade between Iran and North Korea was, I was glad he had absolute knowledge of it, because I can tell you I don't at this point. And I think that's the main lesson to emerge from it.
Thank you. Sharon?
I have a comment to Mr. Zenger on the question.
Just a moment.
You said that the Obama administration ignored North Korea, but there were a lot of talks, the Six Nations talks that I think the U.S. initiated with an offer for benefit packages. On the other hand, flights with nuclear weapons over the nuclear peninsula, maybe because they're canceling each other, you say that it's ignored?
The six-party talks never took place under the Obama administration. The last set of the last set of them happened at the end of the Bush administration. There was talk of putting one six-party talks together. It ultimately never happened. The bomber, which we hope and pray flew unarmed, was sent along at a period of tension, was sent right along the North Korean-South Korean border as a reminder to the North Koreans that we knew how to get to their neighborhood from Omaha. I think they knew that already. But.
My question to Yair, that was just a comment, sorry. You said that that among the three pillars of Israeli security, nuclear is the smaller one. Do you see a situation when our nuclear alleged arsenal is also a liability?
Is also?
A liability.
A liability. Not actually within the near future. I don't think that we have discussed it, there was a discussion of it yesterday and partly today. I don't think that in the current atmosphere about nuclear weapons, Israel would be singled out for specific pressure or demanding higher political costs for having this capability. The only major argument that could have been directed at the Israeli capability was that it might have contributed to further escalation, nuclear escalation or nuclear proliferation in the region. And now the interesting thing about the Israeli nuclear capability, and this stands out, it seems to me, a little bit against the theory, is that on the one hand, my argument is it didn't contribute to stability because it didn't contribute specifically to Israeli deterrence. On the other hand, it didn't contribute to instability in the region in terms of further nuclear proliferation. Because if we look at the Iraqi, Iranian, Syrian, Libyan cases, it seems to me that they were motivated. They were partly inspired by the Israeli effort, but they were motivated primarily by more immediate regional consideration. In the case of Iraq, it was Iran. In the case of Iran, it was a variety of reasons. Iraq, the United States, Israel as well, and so on. So it seems to me that if we define stability, regional stability, in terms of further proliferation, it seems to me that the Israeli case was neither contributing to stability nor contributing to instability.
Last question, Oliver.
Thank you very much. I found it quite interesting that in none of the presentations missile defenses were mentioned, given the fact that missile defenses are supposed to affect strategic stability in all of the contexts that we discussed. But my specific question would be to David Sanger, because the United States is spending billions of dollars, particularly citing the threat from North Korea, yet in your analysis of the strategic calculus of the North Koreans or the Americans, that did not seem to come up. Isn't this program supposed to affect the thinking of the North Koreans, but also the Americans in terms of deterrence and the ability of even a limited nuclear capability of maybe 20 strategic weapons? Thanks very much.
The answer to this question is that the missile defense designed to deal with North Korea, which, as you saw in the presentation yesterday, is at 2 sites, one in Alaska, which I visited, but I suggest you only do it in the summer, and one in California, which is lovely at any time of the year, but a little dry. Those are basically all about convincing the North Koreans that they couldn't strike the continental United States. Well, right now they can't strike the continental United States with anything they have in the way of a missile capability. Maybe they'll be able to in 3 or 4 or 5 years, but right now they can't. North Korea's ultimate ability to wreak havoc is much more local, and to some degree doesn't entirely rely on nuclear weapons. They can destroy Seoul, the vibrant capital of the world's roughly 11th largest economy, with conventional mortars that are basically the equivalent of 30, 35 miles from over the border, from downtown Seoul. So, we've all known the end game with North Korea. If North Korea attacked in either a nuclear or a major conventional way, the war would be over in 36 hours. But the first 12 to 24 hours would look pretty ugly if you were in South Korea and maybe if you were in Japan. And missile defense doesn't affect any of that.
Yair wants to...
Just one general point, although I have my own doubts about the contribution of strategic defenses in the American context or the big powers context. It seems to me that in regional context, if I'm referring to the Middle East, for instance, it seems to me, but this requires a much more elaborate discussion, it seems to me that strategic defenses or anti-ballistic missile defenses, for instance, in the Israeli case, could contribute to strategic stability. But this is a highly debatable point, but it seems to me there is a difference in principle between the big powers nuclear relationship and the regional possible potential nuclear relationship.
Thank you very much, and please join me in thanking the speakers.